Welcome back. So, if you remember our first lecture going to Spring Initializer, we had added some dependencies. One of the dependency was H2 database dependency. So, we are using Maven as our build tool, and the configurations that we need for building this Maven project, like the dependencies, we are keeping in the pom.xml file. POM stands for Project Object Model, pom.xml file. Here we keep all the dependencies. So we have a project tag, and then it has its own parent tag. So parent is pointing to Spring Boot starter. Then this project itself, which is this one, has its own group ID which we had entered while downloading it from the initializer. Then artifact ID, its own version, which version of Java 8 we are using. Then it has dependencies tag, and this is an array. There are multiple dependencies. So we have added these dependencies. One of the dependency was H2 database. That was a dependency we added, and this is the database which is now will run on our file system, so we don't have to download any extra database like Oracle, MySQL. We will download MySQL later, but for now we will use this database. So again, if we go back, so in how the database works, there is a database server. On that database server, we can create multiple databases. Database 1, and then database 2, and each database has tables, table 1, table 2. So this is how it works. Similarly for database 2 also. So database server has multiple databases, and each database has multiple tables, and each table has rows and column, which where we store the data. We will see that in detail. So now I want to enable H2 database in my application. So when will this H2 database server run? Because this is also a database, so it should run as a server. Because this is part of our Spring Boot, so it will run on the same port and IP address as our Spring Boot will run. It will run in an embedded mode along with the same credentials, but it will have a separate URL, and that is what we will explore now. So there is certain configuration that we have to add. So I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to explain you the details. So the configuration for our database we will keep inside the resources file. Source resources application.properties. Here we'll paste it here. So let's understand one by one the different properties, what they mean. So here we are saying this is a database. So we are saying allow H2 database to be accessed via URL. So we have to enable this property. If we want to have a specific URL on which we want to see our database explorer on the browser, we can give that. I have kept it to default. Default is this only. If I don't give this, then also it will be available on this URL. Then the database name and URL. So here let's say I will say property management system DB. So I'm going to copy this and paste it here. So this is the database URL. So H2 database we can run in memory also, and also file based. So in memory means until the time our application is running, the data will be there. As soon as it will stop, the data is gone. But what we want is even after we stop the application, our data should stay. So we have taken the file based. So remember to use this syntax. Now, this is a database, right? So this is a database. Similarly, there can be many databases. So every database runs on the server, and the server in this case is localhost 8080 slash h2-console. That's the server URL. So the server will have its own username password. So by default the username is SA, password is blank. And now every database also has a driver name, driver class name. Okay, what is a driver class name? Let's understand that a little bit. So what we are doing now is we are using an ORM framework. ORM framework means object relational mapping. So let's try to understand that. So here we have our Java class, and our Java class has a property called title, description. So this was the property. So property, we know the property. The property class we created. So it has a title, description, then it will have a price, then it will have an owner, like this. Similarly, we also have to create a table. In the table, we have to create a table. Our database is inside our database. This is a table, and name of the table is, let's say, property table. This is the table, and now table has rows and columns. So this table will have first column as ID, which will act as a primary key. The second column will be this one, title. So title. Third column will be description. So description. Fourth column will be price. So price. Fifth column will be owner details. So let's say owner. If there are more columns, similarly there will be more fields here. Now, if we did not use any ORM framework like Hibernate, so what we are using? We are using an ORM framework called Hibernate and JPA. Hibernate, Hibernate and JPA. JPA stands for Java Persistence API. ORM, object, which means this one. Relational mapping. Relational means this one, table, and their mapping. So this object is mapping to this table. In this object, this the variable is mapped to this column. This variable is mapped to this column. This variable is mapped to this column, and this variable is mapped to this column. And let's say if we will create an object of this table class called product entity 1 is equal to new product entity, and then we will set the value of this title and this, then this entry will be also stored in as a one row. Similarly, we will create object 2 of this, that will become another row here, another row. So the the class variables are becoming column names in our table, and the every object's data stored getting stored in the variables is becoming the values here and in a row. So this is called object relational mapping, ORM. And who is doing that? With the JPA specification, Java Persistence API specifications, we are using Hibernate and Spring Data JPA together. So Hibernate along with Spring Data JPA is doing this magic of mapping our Java class objects to database tables, their columns, and Java class objects values as the rows. So this is done by this ORM framework called Hibernate and JPA. For in our case, it's Spring Data JPA, and that's the dependency we had added. If you remember, we had added this Spring Data JPA dependency, this one. That internally this uses Hibernate framework. So Spring Data JPA internally uses Hibernate framework to do this mapping between our Java class object to database. So now comes the question, what is this driver name? What is this driver name? So this driver name is specific to a database. So here we are using H2, so we will use or.h2 driver. If we are using MySQL database, we will use a different driver. And what this driver does is it tells Hibernate how to convert the queries from this Java code to a H2 database understandable language. Because every database you can write queries, but every database has small amount of difference in their syntax with which you can write the SQL query. Hence, this driver name helps Hibernate to know, okay, for H2 database, I have to write the queries like this to insert information to the table. For MySQL, there will be another driver we will provide, which will tell Hibernate to create queries for this object in a form that it will be stored in a MySQL database. For Oracle, it will be another driver. So driver tells Hibernate or the ORM framework how to convert this data in the supported database query. For Oracle, the query will be different. H2 it will be different. MySQL it will be different. So because of Hibernate, we don't have to write query. Hibernate or the Spring Data JPA, they will take care of generating query and dealing with the database. We will just focus on writing code and writing the queries also in Java understandable language. So we will see that in upcoming lecture. So now this is about whenever we run our application, what do we want to do? Do we want to drop all the tables in the database and create new tables again, which means all the data will be lost? Or we want to keep what exists, whatever table exists, and only if there are new items available, only then do the update. Don't drop everything, just keep updating. So this property that you see helps to do that, helps Hibernate to do that. DDL-auto. We can either keep create here, which means it will drop every time the application restarts. Everything will be dropped. New table will be created again and the data will be lost. But in real world, we don't do that. Otherwise, our application data will be lost from, let's say, from all social media platform, from banks. So it should be update. This one is used for enabling printing of query. So in our local development or in the dev environment, we want to see what kind of SQL query did Hibernate create for us. So if we put this to true, this property, it will print that query here somewhere. We will see that as well. And then we have the dialect. And this is the class which along with the driver works together to create the query of our Java code into a supported database that we are using. So if we are using H2, so this dialect will work with this driver to create H2 supported queries. If we are using MySQL, this dialect will go and create queries for MySQL supported database supported query. So I hope now what is an ORM framework is clear, what is Hibernate is clear, what is JPA. JPA is just a specification. Spring Data JPA is built on top of it. Hibernate has implemented that specification. So JPA is a specification. Hibernate is an ORM framework which has implemented the specification, and Spring Data JPA is built on top of Hibernate. Spring Data JPA is built on top of Hibernate. But the main goal is converting a Java class based data into a database table so that developers can only focus on Java coding instead of writing queries for the table. So let's continue in the next video to implement this whole thing that we just discussed. Thank you. I will see you in the next video.